Number 10. MERLYN McAllister. On March the 14th of 2021, 51-year-old construction worker MERLYN McAllister, a Bayesian immigrant living in the west side of Chicago with his wife of 25 years, took the family dog out for a Sunday morning walk. It was a weekly routine he'd kept up for many years, but that particular morning would end in tragedy. While taking the dog around the block, McAllister was shot 3 times by an unknown gunman. His wife heard the gunfire and ran to her husband's aid. She was shocked to see him lying on the ground with bloody bullet wounds in his torso. He was pronounced dead after being transported to Loyola Hospital. McAllister was survived by his wife, 3 children, and his dog. Number 9. Isabella Talas. In June of 2020, 21-year-old Isabella Talas took her dog for a walk outside her apartment building in Denver, Colorado. Her boyfriend, 27-year-old Dorian Simon, joined her. Simon soon became embroiled in a contentious argument with another resident in the apartment complex, Michael Close, age 37. He felt that Talas and Simon were not adequately managing their dog's misbehavior, and he began to shout down at them from his apartment window. As the altercation escalated, Close pulled out an AR-15 and opened fire on the couple. Talas died at the scene after sustaining multiple gunshot wounds. Simon was hit twice himself, but ultimately survived the incident after being transported to a hospital and undergoing surgery on his shattered femur. Simon, along with Talas's father, later filed a lawsuit against Close and former Denver police sergeant Daniel Politica, the owner of the firearm used in the murder. Politica, who was Michael Close's friend and confidant, had apparently been concerned about his friend's mental state leading up to the shooting. Politica owned a gun shop called Tyrant Arms LLC, though he insisted that Close had obtained the AR-15 without his knowledge. Simon and Talas's father were seeking $100,000 in the civil suit. Close has since been charged with 18 counts, including murder in the first degree. As a result of the tragic episode, Colorado Governor Jared Polis signed a bill that requires gun owners to report stolen firearms to the proper authorities. The law was named the Isabella Joy Talas Act in honor of the victim. Number 8. Michael Canals. 26-year-old Michael Canals of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was a professional in the music industry. 3 months prior to the tragic incident that occurred on October the 26th of 2019, Canals had adopted a rescue dog, Rosie, after she'd followed him home. While he was out with Rosie on a walk through the streets of Philadelphia, the two became the victims of a violent hit and run. A careering minivan struck the man and his dog on the sidewalk and subsequently fled the scene. The police were able to track down the vehicle later that day, but they discovered it had been stolen before the incident, so the van's owner was not the perpetrator they were after. A couple of weeks later, Philadelphia police apprehended a man by the name of Khalif Moore, who they believed to be the individual behind the hit and run that resulted in the deaths of both Canals and Rosie. Moore had already served time in prison for drug and weapons charges. Canals and his beloved dog were ultimately buried together by his family. Number 7. Winston McKay. 40-year-old Winston McKay of Upper Manhattan had just finished celebrating his anniversary with his husband of 2 years when he was met with a stray bullet from an altercation of which he wasn't even a part. In June of 2019, McKay and the family dog, Milton, were out for a walk in the park across the street from their apartment. As they made their way back home, McKay stumbled upon an argument between 2 men on the street. The shouting match soon turned violent, and rifle shots were fired. McKay, who was simply minding his own business, was hit by one of the bullets. Despite being rushed to the hospital, he passed away from his wounds a short while later. The New York Police Department's investigation into the murder resulted in 2 arrests. Augier McLean and Eric Batista were identified on surveillance footage as the 2 men on the street. They were engaged in a dispute over drugs when McLean fired the shot that led to McKay's untimely demise. According to McKay's husband, their dog Milton still slept by their bed, waiting for his owner to return home. Number 6. MILAN LONCAR. 25-year-old MILAN LONCAR of Philadelphia was a recent college graduate with a brand new job and plans to move in with his girlfriend, who he hoped to propose to soon. All of his plans for the future came to a tragic end at about 7 p.m. on January the 13th of 2021. LONCAR was out walking his dog in Brewery Town a neighborhood in the city's north, when he was approached by two hooded men. One of them stood in front of him, the other behind him. The two thugs proceeded to rob the young man, and as surveillance footage would later indicate, they then pulled out a gun and shot him in the chest. The attackers ran away, leaving LONCAR to slowly bleed out on the sidewalk. He was able to pull out his phone and call 911, all while holding on to his dog's leash. Unfortunately, while he did make it to Temple University Hospital, he eventually passed away. 20-year-old Josephus Davis was arrested a week later and accused of carrying out the murder. Davis had been released from prison just 2 weeks prior to killing LONCAR after serving time for a separate carjacking incident. Number 5. Lauren Rice. An English professor at a local community college in Des Moines, Iowa, met a swift and tragic end as she walked her dog on a Sunday morning in April of 2020. Her name was Lauren Rice, and she was a staple of the Des Moines community due to her tireless efforts, both as an instructor at the college and the institution's coordinator for their study abroad program. In London, she had been self-quarantining at her house leading up to the incident that claimed her life. While enjoying some fresh air with her dog, Rice was suddenly struck by a pickup truck that had mounted the sidewalk and knocked over several telephone poles as it seemingly went out of control. The driver of the vehicle in question was 50-year-old Jason Sassman, who in the past had been in and out of jail multiple times. The authorities determined that Sassman had purposefully run into Rice and her dog, killing both, and he was charged with second-degree murder. Number 4. Jesse Strike-Kest and Jacob Vogelman. 24-year-old Jessie Strike-Kest of Brooklyn, New York, and her boyfriend, Jacob Vogelman, became victims of extreme weather on October the 29th of 2012. At the time, they were taking their dog Max on a stroll through Ditmas Park in Brooklyn. Unfortunately for the young couple and their canine companion, New York was on the cusp of being utterly ravaged by the storms brought about by Hurricane Sandy. The hurricane swept through the streets of Brooklyn at the same time Jesse and Jacob were walking with Max, and the resulting damage was devastating. Power lines were toppled, streets were flooded, and trees came crashing to the ground. The latter occurrences proved especially perilous for the young New Yorkers in Ditmas Park that night. One tree was uprooted from the sidewalk and struck Jesse and Jacob where they stood. They were killed instantly. Max was taken to an emergency veterinary hospital and survived, though he was forced to live on without his loving owners. Number 3. Kate Leadbetter and Matthew Field. Kate Leadbetter and Matthew Field were a happy young couple from Alexandra Hills in Australia. They were proud dog owners and were expecting yet another addition to the family in the form of their unborn son, Miles. It was Australia Day 2021, a national holiday celebrated every January in order to commemorate the first European settlement on the continent in 1788. When the pair took their dogs out for a walk that day, they became the victims of a violent car accident. The couple was hit head-on by a stolen car being driven by an unnamed 17-year-old perpetrator who was intoxicated at the time. The couple was killed on impact. The driver faced many charges as a result of his deadly hit and run, but the Australian authorities were unable to hold him legally accountable for the death of the couple's unborn baby. Today's topic was requested by Whitney Thyha, Charmaine886, and Maurice Boyd. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Harassment in Everett Park. A man was killed while walking his dog near a park in Everett, Washington, but the circumstances leading up to his death were more complicated as reports indicated that the unnamed victim had played an active part in his own demise. On May the 11th of 2021, the man in question was taking his dog for a walk through Everett Park when he approached an elderly woman and her granddaughter and began harassing them. According to witnesses at the scene, the man was waving a metal baton in their faces, shouting at them and threatening them with pepper spray. Multiple bystanders had sprung into action in an attempt to defend the woman and her young granddaughter, but the belligerent man turned his hostility on them as well, spraying several people with pepper spray. Two friends who were fishing nearby heard the commotion and decided to find out what was going on. They came upon the scene and tried to defuse the dog walker's aggression, but in turn, they too were threatened with pepper spray. Before being sprayed, however, an armed citizen entered the fray and shot the dog walker. The gunman, who'd acted under the impression that the pepper spray in the man's hand was a gun, was subsequently arrested by police. Number 1. Raymel Boston. Having survived a bout with leukemia in his earlier years, 29-year-old Raymel Boston had already experienced considerable turmoil before the attack that claimed his life. In 2021, Boston, a resident of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was walking through the city streets with his dog on July the 30th. The specific circumstances surrounding the altercation that ultimately led to his death are unknown, but neighbors claim they saw him speaking with someone driving a gray vehicle. Witnesses reported seeing him running down an alley after being threatened by the driver. Moments later, several gunshots were heard. By the time his body was found, Boston had already succumbed to the wounds he'd sustained in the attack. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have to walk one extremely large and unruly dog or 10 small lap dogs? Let us know in the comments section below.